A high-stakes battle at the Supreme Court on Obamacare yet again. Oral arguments made in a case that challenges who is eligible for a subsidy under the law. The justices appearing to be divided along ideological lines. What else is new there? Ohio Senator Rob Portman, Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, back with us, sir. And how are you, Senator? And good morning.
Thanks for having me on.
You know what it's like, you're trying to read between the lines here, knowing that a decision will not come to late June or early July. Make your case, first of all, for the plaintiffs, why you agree with them.
Well, the plain language of the statute. Justice Scalia said it best, this is what it says, and how can you interpret it otherwise? So it says exchanges established by the states. And then second, Bill, there's what they call legislative history around it. This MIT economist, Jonathan Gruber, who came out and said this was on purpose because we wanted to incentivize the states to establish these exchanges. So it seems to me that the language is very clear, and it seems to me that the background to it, the people who have come out and been honest about what they were doing, have made it clear.
Let me put you on the spot. Can you cite a Supreme Court ruling that says this is what the language says, and therefore we have to agree with it, or go with it, or go along with it?
What the Supreme Court does is they look at the language, they also look at the context, including the legislative history, and they look at precedent. And I think in this case it's pretty clear they really don't have an out. Justice Roberts was a little creative in his interpretation of Obamacare in terms of establishing that there was a tax and a taxing power. But in this case, there really is no language in the legislation that gives them the alternative. So I think it's likely to go in favor of King versus Burwell.
You mentioned Justice Scalia. Here is what he said in part now. Quote, answer me in principle. Is it not the case that if the only reasonable interpretation of a particular provision produces disastrous consequences for the rest of the statute, it nonetheless means what it says? And I know you agree with him because you cited him. Here's Elena Kagan. She writes this, quote on screen, if you look at the entire text, it's pretty clear that you oughtn't to treat those 5 words in the way you are. Is she right? Can you see it that way?
Well, look, again, I think it's very plain. It says established by the states. And again, if you look at the people who were the architects of this plan, they say, that was because they wanted to incentivize the states to establish the exchanges. 36 states, the District of Columbia chose not to, and that's fine, but they, under the law, were not supposed to get the subsidies. This is another case, Bill, as you know, where the administration has chosen to go around Congress and around the American people and establish, in this case by an IRS ruling, what the law really meant. This has been done over a dozen times in Obamacare where the actual language of the statute is not being followed. I think that's a dangerous precedent, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. You ought to believe that because, our founders established this separate but equal powers, the legislative power to create laws and then the executive power to execute them. So I think this is part of a broader problem that we've seen increasingly in this administration.
Well, we did a poll just this week. Kind of curious about the popularity of the law. 58% say it's unfavorable. That's a clear majority. Now, Republicans in Congress, Paul Ryan and a few others, have an off-ramp plan for Obamacare, where they would give tax credits to help those who lose their subsidies in the event the Supreme Court rules against the administration. So now, that off-ramp was announced the day before oral arguments. They're trying to influence the court, let the justices know, hey, we can manage this in the event you go this way. What do you think of that?
Well, look, I think that's very important, not so much to influence the court because who knows what the court will end up thinking, but I think it's important that we provide for those millions of Americans, and by the way, probably about 160,000 Ohioans are going to be caught in this difficult problem. A lot of them didn't want to lose their insurance they had. They were in the individual market, for instance, and they were thrown into these exchanges. Now suddenly they'd have the rug pulled out from under them after having been told they can't have their old plan, they have to take this plan. So I think that it is important that Republicans and Democrats alike, stand up and be sure that we're providing these folks the ability to get access to a plan that meets their needs and their families' needs.
All right, Senator, thank you for your time. I know one of your constituents is the ambassador in South Korea, and our best to him and his family, too.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Our prayers to him and his family.
You bet. Thank you, Senator Portman, Republican from Ohio.